speaker today here is David Wood, as it is the topic, as we are remembering the 911, the topic is 911 is not over. David Wood is a former professor and he is a debater. He debated many Muslims. And he is an awesome brother in the Lord. Thank you. Let's welcome David Wood.
I wish we'd change the order up a bit. Start off with dancing and then uplifting presentations, answered prayers, and then I get to talk about terrorism. Real downers, so I'll try to get everyone too down here. I don't know if you've been following the, I have a bit of a cold, so bear with me. I don't know if you heard today there were violent attacks against U.S. embassies in Libya and Egypt today. In Libya, some Muslim protesters stormed the embassy, tore down the American flag, and put the flag of jihad at the top of it. And in Libya, they stormed the consulate there, and one American worker was killed. And what I found kind of most disturbing was in the article I read, someone who was being interviewed said, "Why did they pick today? Don't they know that this is a day of mourning for us?" I'm sure it entirely slipped their mind. And all I could think was, are we really that clueless still after 11 years? And it seems so. The idea behind this person's complaints, I don't see why they would pick today, is, I'd say, after 11 years of being bombarded with, it's such a tiny minority of extremists that if you just get Osama bin Laden and drone strikes take out a couple of others, then, I mean, everyone who's left wouldn't dare hurt our feelings by messing with anyone on September 11th anniversary, right? And so it's kind of a product. It's something that we've created for ourselves. If you watched the president's Cairo speech a couple of years ago, he had an interesting quotation, and I know who wrote this. It actually came from Imam Faisal Abdul Rauf, who wrote that section of the president's speech. But he said the Holy Quran teaches that if anyone killed a man, it is as if he killed all mankind. And if anyone saved a man, it is as if he saved all mankind. And if you know where that comes from in the Quran, you should be absolutely horrified at what just happened. Because that is a horrible, horrible distortion of Surah 532. And Surah 532 is one verse of the Quran. I have absolutely no idea why Jews aren't shouting that verse from the rooftops every time there's a dispute over Israel. If you read Surah 5, verse 32 of the Quran, it doesn't say, if anyone killed a man, it is as if he killed all mankind. What it actually says is, therefore, God ordained for the children of Israel that if anyone killed a man, apart from legal punishments, it is as if he killed all mankind. And therefore, you have to pay attention when there's a therefore, because it means something just happened. That section of the Quran is talking about Cain and Abel. And when it says we ordained for the children of Israel, that quotation, if anyone killed a man as if he killed all mankind, is actually a quotation from the Talmud, Mishnah Sanhedrin. And it's a commentary on the Old Testament story of Cain and Abel. And the Jewish commentator was saying, this verse in the Old Testament of Cain and Abel, where it says, "And your brother's blood cries to me from the ground." He said it doesn't say your brother's blood, like it's talking about his blood. It's actually plural. And it says your brother's bloods. And the commentator says, it's not talking about his blood, it's talking about his future generations of offspring, his blood relations, since it's plural. And that therefore, by killing him, he didn't just kill him, he killed all future generations. And I think it's ironic that the most peaceful passage of the Quran is actually a quotation from the Talmud. But what's disturbing is that the President of the United States got up there, ignored the part about this being a teaching of the children of Israel, ripped it totally out of context, and then just quoted quoted part of the verse as if this is a teaching that applies to Muslims. And now, some teachings of the Jews do apply to Muslims, but this is one where the very next verse gives the contrast. The very next verse. So 532 says, this is the teaching of the children of Israel. 533 gives the teaching for Muslims. And on a side note, since we've been talking about Israel tonight, there's another reason it would be interesting if Jews would quote the Quran to Muslims when Muslims are bringing up various issues. When it says that if you killed a man as if you killed all mankind, it makes an exception, and it says, except for spreading mischief in the land. And so what you have here is, according to the Quran, you can I invite everyone to go read this verse. It says that Allah ordained that the Jews don't get to kill people, right? Except for violating their laws in the land. It specifically says in the land. What land is that referring to? It's talking about China. Alaska, Canada. What land is that talking to? And that's why I'm just saying. I mean, if I were over in Israel and people were saying, "Hey, you occupied our land," I don't know why. I don't know why anyone would not bring this passage up. But the interesting part is the contrast between 532, which is the teaching of the Jews, and the very next verse, which is the verse that's directed towards Muslims, and it says, the punishment of those who wage war against Allah and His apostle and strive to make mischief in the land is only this, that they should be murdered or crucified, or their hands and their feet should be cut off on opposite sides, or they should be imprisoned. This shall be as a disgrace for them in this world, and in the hereafter they shall have a grievous chastisement. Punishment for making mischief in the land, and now we're talking about Muslim lands, is execution or crucifixion or dismemberment or exile. And if you bring in another very simple, very basic Muslim teaching, 9/11 makes perfect sense. Read two passages from the Hadith. Sunan Ibn Majah, 2759, the Messenger of Allah said, whoever equips a warrior in the cause of Allah, he will have a reward like his. If you equip a warrior in the cause of Allah, you get the same reward he does. In other words, if you don't go out and fight, but you pay for someone else to get a sword and a spear and a horse and stuff, and they go out and fight, you get the same reward from God. Sahih al-Bukhari, 2843, Allah's Messenger said, he who prepares a ghazi is a jihad warrior, going out in Allah's cause is given a reward equal to that of a ghazi. So if you go out and fight, you get a certain reward from Allah. But also if you're the one who prepared him, who paid for him to go out and fight, you get the same reward. And the same applies to enemy combatants. If you're an enemy combatant, if you're fighting against Muslims, then you get a certain reward. And if you're the one who paid for that person to fight against Muslims, you get the same reward. Now, the passage I just quoted from the Quran, Surah 5:33, the verse after the verse that the President of the United States quoted, what was the penalty for making mischief in a Muslim land? Crucifixion, execution, things like that. That's the penalty. Now, from a Muslim perspective, are we making mischief in a Muslim land? Is our nation making mischief in Muslim lands? Yes, of course, in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, but also with Israel, by supporting Israel, according to Islamic doctrine, if Islam has ever possessed a land, it is always Muslim land. And so by supporting Israel, we're making mischief in a Muslim land. Now, put those couple of things together. The penalty for the soldiers who are fighting in Muslim lands, or for government that is supporting the nation of Israel, the penalty, according to Surah 533, making mischief in a Muslim land is death. But, as we saw, it's not just the person, it's not just the soldier who goes to Afghanistan who's responsible. The people who pay the bills so that he can go out and fight are equally responsible, according to Muhammad. Who pays the bills so that the military can go out and fight? The American taxpayer. Now think about how simple this is to understand, because people, you've heard it over and over again in programs and interviews and so on about the September 11th attacks. You've heard Muslims and non-Muslims say this can't have anything to do with true Islam because innocent people were killed. That was not a military target. Innocent people were killed. And not only were innocent people killed, Muslims were killed in the September 11th attacks. And so obviously Muslims are not allowed to kill innocent people, and Muslims are not allowed to kill their fellow Muslims. Therefore, that does not represent Islam. How innocent, what innocent people died on September 11th? A bunch of American workers and taxpayers. As far as the Muslims who died in the attacks, not the actual terrorists, they're in a different category. The Muslims who died are from an Islamic perspective, the biggest traitors ever. They're paying for U.S. soldiers to go over and support attacks on their fellow Muslims. If you're a group like Al-Qaeda, and by the way, you can find the exact same teachings in the Al-Qaeda manuals and stuff like that. You usually won't find the quotations, but they'll say, because these people were supporting the American government, and the American government is doing this, therefore, they're all open. They're all prime targets for jihad. And guess what? They're exactly right. They're exactly right. I quoted you the passages. Penalty for making mischief, death. Penalty for anyone supporting that activity, same, which is death. And so if you put that together, what do you get? You get 9/11, and you get all the other attempts that have been made over the years. And think about this. Verse 533 of the Quran justifies completely, beyond any doubt, attacks like the one on September 11, 2001. The President of the United States, and I'm not just picking him. I don't think he did it intentionally. That was written for him. This was speech writers. So I would actually accuse the President of being incompetent or something like that. I'm being deliberately deceptive with that verse. That was someone else who was doing that. And it's not just. I'm not just pointing a finger here at presidents. I've read the exact same thing on CNN. I've read that quotation. Islam teaches if anyone kills a man, it is as if he killed all mankind. I've read on Fox News, if anyone kills a man, it is as if he killed all mankind. This is what Islam teaches. That's why Islam rules out terrorism. Think about what's going on here. 533 justifies every horrendous thing you think of when you think about terrorism or violence in Islam. Honor killings is another form. If you think about what honor killings are for, young girls becoming too westernized, running around, having boyfriends and so on, making mischief. They're spreading corruption in the land. Why? Because they're influencing the next generation of Muslim girls. And so what's the penalty? Well, some kind of very bad, very violent penalty. So every horrible thing you think about when you think about terrorism is justified by 533. And the media, and the government, and officials, and Muslims and non-Muslims almost universally tell us all of that violence is unjustified according to Islam because, well, verse 532, which is written, which is a quotation from the Jews, and which is horribly ripped out of context and directed towards Muslims. When you think about what's going on here, it actually makes perfect sense if you understand what Islam teaches. In Islam, there are 3 stages of jihad. And this is based on the life of Muhammad. This is based on the Quran. You find the same thing in the Hadith. You find the same thing in the Sirah. You find the same thing in the Tafsir. You find the same, well, some Muslim sources will list it as 4 stages. They divide up the defensive stage into a required defensive stage and just an optional defensive stage. But the same thing, you have defensive jihad. But what you have are stages of jihad depending on the number of Muslims in a population. And if you have a small minority of Muslims in a population, 1%, less than 1%, 2%, something like that, follow the example of Muhammad when he was in Mecca and he was a persecuted prophet, Muslims are supposed to preach a message of peace and tolerance. The goal of Muhammad was not to live in peace and tolerance. The goal was to protect the Muslim community when he was in a weakened state and was a minority and was being persecuted. Now, just to clarify, before someone misunderstands me, I'm not saying that when a Muslim tells you Islam is a religion of peace, he's trying to deceive you. Chances are that Muslim probably believes that. That Muslim has been influenced by the same values here in the West that you and I have been influenced by. And I find that when I quote passages of the Quran or the Hadith, the Muslims, they generally have no clue what I'm talking about. They've never heard any of it. What I'm talking about is not what your average Muslim believes. I'm talking about what Islam teaches. And there are Muslims who do know what it teaches. And so stage 1, when Muslims form a small minority of the population, that's when peace and tolerance is the rule. When the number rises, and this happened when Muhammad left Mecca and traveled to Medina, formed some alliances and had a larger number of followers, instantly the message changed. And it said, now you are allowed to fight in order to defend yourself. This is Surah 22. Now you are allowed to fight against those who oppressed you. Notice, this is defensive. This is defensive. It's not saying go out and conquer the world, go out and subjugate everyone. This is defensive jihad, but this is only the 2nd stage. And it allows certain things like if someone is attacking the Muslim community, you can defend yourself. But also, if someone is criticizing the Muslim community or criticizing Muhammad, you can retaliate against that. And lots of Muslims in the West want to convince us that this is this is Islam's final word on the matter. Defensive jihad, hey, we believe we can defend ourselves. Most people wouldn't have a problem with self-defense, but that's not the final teaching. That's not the final command of the Quran. And just so you know, Islam operates on the principle of abrogation. Earlier verses are canceled by later verses. Later verses are the ones that apply. So as far as a Muslim interpretation of the Quran, if you find 2 verses that are in conflict, the only question is which one came last. That's the one that applies to Muslims. One of the last 2 surahs of the Quran, the last surah of the Quran, Surah 110, it's only a couple of verses. The last major surah of the Quran revealed was Surah 9, which just happens to be the most violent chapter of the Quran. And Surah 9:29, there are other verses that are important in there, but from a Christian and Jewish perspective, Surah 9, verse 25 is the one everyone in the world needs to be aware of. It says, as a command to Muslims, fight those who do not believe in Allah. Now people will say, but we believe in God. Well, keep reading. No, we don't, because the very next verse in the same passage accuses both Christians and Jews of actually worshiping other figures. It says in the very next verse that Christians say that Jesus is Lord, and it says that Jews say that Ezra is the son of Allah. I've never met a Jew who's said that. Neither have any of you, because we can't find any record of any Jewish group in all of history who maintain that Ezra is the son of God. But that's what the Quran says about Jewish belief, and it's a justification for going out and subjugating both Jews and Christians. So Surah 9:29 says, fight those who do not believe in Allah. And it goes on to say, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued, and it specifically lists Jews and Christians, the people of the book, as the target. So the final marching orders for Muslims. And so what you have here in these 3 stages is, again, when Muslims form a small minority of the population, peace and tolerance. When their numbers rise, they can start defending themselves. And that's actually, the defensive stage is actually the stage where terrorism is most effectively used. Because stage 3 when Muslims actually dominate a society and can go out and actively subjugate everyone and reduce everyone to a lower status, they don't need the terrorism, right? They can march an army, take over, and subjugate everyone, and everyone has to live as a second-class citizen. So terrorism is actually part of the defensive stage of jihad. And if you think about the September 11th attacks, from a Muslim perspective, they're defending themselves. They're messing around in our lands, and we get to retaliate according to Islam. Who do we get to retaliate against? People who are making mischief and people who pay their bills. That's all of you. All of you. That's who we get to retaliate against. And so if we're talking about September 11th, whether it's over, think about where we are on that scale. We're still in the defensive jihad mode. And in another sense, here in the West, because of the small minority of Muslim populations, most Muslims are in that stage one, where they're not attacking, they're not defending Islam through terrorist attacks. They're told to preach a message of peace and tolerance. And again, I'm not saying Muslims are aware of these three stages or anything like that. I'm saying these things have a way of working themselves to the surface in Islam, whether most Muslims are aware of it or not. Right now, you can blindfold me, pick a country on a map, tell me the number of Muslims, tell me the percentage of Muslims in a country. Don't tell me what the country is, and I will tell you the main message that's being proclaimed in that country by Muslims. And if you point to a Western country, I'm going to say, hey, they're talking about peace and tolerance. If you're talking about a country in Central Africa where Muslims are a minority, but not a very powerful minority, I'm going to say, hey, you're seeing lots of terrorist attacks, you're seeing churches blown up, things like that, anytime they're offended. And if you show me, if you pick a country where Muslims make up 80 or 90% of the population, I'll tell you, other people are second-class citizens in that society. This is exactly what we find in the Muslim sources. It's exactly the pattern modeled after Muhammad, and it's the pattern we see anywhere you go in the world. And yet, no one can figure this out. No one can figure it out. You open the Muslim sources, hey, we have 3 stages. If I get up and say, hey, there are 3 stages, I'll quote you. I'll quote you the Muslim scholars. I'll quote you the Quran. I'll quote you the Hadith. Racist bigot, that's not how it works. And the biggest mistake our leaders and everyone else are making here in the West with respect to Islam is this. When it comes to Sharia, when it comes to jihad, what are these sources? The sources are the Quran and Muhammad's example and the interpretations of Muhammad's companions. Those are the sources of Islamic law, Islamic doctrine. In the West, how are our leaders and the politicians, what do they treat as the source of Islamic doctrine? Any random Muslim down the street. I went and talked to a random Muslim down the street, and she said, that's not what Islam teaches at all. Guess what? The lovely, peaceful Muslim down the street is not, has never been, and never will be an authoritative source on what Islam teaches. The Quran is, and the Quran is crystal clear on this. I mean, there's lots of things in the Quran where I can't figure out what it's saying, but on this is crystal clear. And the Hadith, crystal clear. And we look around and see things that are kind of disintegrating. We see problems. We see advancements and so on. But is 9/11 over? No. I mean, the date, of course, is. But as far as this being just a symptom of a doctrine of defensive jihad, is the United States still making mischief in Muslim lands from a Muslim perspective? Absolutely. As long as there's a nation of Israel that is backed by the United States of America, and as long as the United States of America is active in any Muslim country, from a Muslim perspective, from an Orthodox Muslim perspective, we're making mischief in Muslim lands. And you can kill some terrorists with drone strikes, but you're kind of patching up a sinking ship here. Now, when I say that, I don't mean to imply that things are hopeless. I don't believe they are at all. If you look at statistics, about the number of Muslims who support violence or honor killings or terrorism, you actually find that it's not the tiny minority of extremists that people. I mean, if you read the media, you'd conclude that it's like a tiny fraction of 1% of Muslims who would support any of this. And in actuality, you find numbers more like 10, 15, 20, 25% support things like honor killings or killing in the name of Islam, things like that, even in the West. And if you want, I have the statistics on the slide, and I get to show it to you. But those are the statistics. But if you think about that, it's still a minority, even if you have 10 or 15 or 20% supporting various things. It's still a minority. And what that means is that the majority of Muslims will find these teachings as repulsive as I do. And if you think about our place in history, where Muslims have come to the United States from around the world, we have the opportunity to talk to them. There are certainly lots of things we need to do as Christians, preaching the gospel. But one interesting thing you'll find is when Muslims convert, why they convert. Probably the most common thing you'll hear about, especially from Muslims who come from the East, is something like dreams and visions and so on. But I find an increasing number of Muslims who say that they converted by comparing Islam and Christianity, by realizing what Muhammad taught and comparing that with what Jesus taught, by opening the Quran and seeing God does not love the unbelievers, Surah 3 verse 32, and then opening Matthew chapter 5 and saying that God loves absolutely everyone. And they look at that and they compare that. So with the terrorism and with the violence and with all these violent jihadist doctrines, we can still see ourselves in a very positive position in history. The battle that's going on right now in the West, mostly, is a battle of information versus misinformation. And I kind of get disheartened when the President of the United States has millions of listeners when he says, the Quran teaches that if anyone kills someone, it's as if he killed all mankind. As if this is a teaching for Muslims, when it's not. And I make a YouTube video responding, and I get 20,000 hits or something like that, right? I look at that, how can we compete, right? How can we compete when all the news agencies and all the politicians are saying one thing, and we kind of whisper it behind the scenes. But I think the people who are spreading the misinformation kind of set themselves up for a massive fall, because the deception has grown so thick that the truth is just obvious when you lay it down, when you can go and say, hey, Mr. President, you said this. Let's actually read just 2 verses of the Quran and see if you're right. The field is wide open, and if we can actually get people to understand the teachings of jihad, yes, there may still be terrorist attack here or there, but I guarantee once the facts about Islam become common knowledge, we're going to have more and more Muslims looking at that and then looking over at Jesus and saying, wow, I think I've been brought up on the wrong path.